speed system. It relies on checkpoints along the rail line, such as this one, which consists of a detector augment and a location augment connected to a computer. Doesn't really require anything. Even this internet card is only to install the program via pastebin. And once you do, you give it an initial velocity. You give it a velocity and a distance in which to achieve that velocity, and it'll do its best to make sure that the train gets to the final distance at the specified velocity. For example, here I specify a target velocity of 20 kilometers per hour in a distance of 50 meters. And then when it reaches that checkpoint over there in 50 meters, it should be going roughly 20 kilometers per hour. So I just have some arbitrary train here. It doesn't matter what locomotive, what rolling stock you use, anything will work. And all you do now is just throttle it up a little bit to get to the first checkpoint. Once you do, it will sounds like and we'll set the throttle accordingly. We should approach 20 kilometers per hour as we hit the second checkpoint. Yes. Essentially, we're going to cruise for a while, slowly speeding up. And then we're going in a loop on this short test track here. And once we reach about this point, we're going to encounter another checkpoint, which will slow our speed in preparation for the final approach back into the station. You see, so far we've traveled, maybe 400 meters. Still slowly increasing. Now, the accuracy of this system can vary with a margin of error of a few kilometers per hour, so don't expect that the reliability to be too high. However, we are approaching the final turn. We should approach the final checkpoint. And here we are back at the station. You can see that it logs every single pass that a locomotive makes over top of the detector. And it has stopped. There's still some calibration that needs to be done for the braking algorithm, obviously, as you can see, because this computer is calibrated to make all trains stop at the end here. And for slow-moving trains, you saw when we approached, we were only traveling about 20 kilometers per hour. That doesn't work so well yet. But throttle up works relatively good, and immediately throttling down works as well. Now, the way this works, if I can show you through here, is by... Oops. Edit. Now, you can see that what I do essentially is if I scroll all the way down to the bottom, while true, handle an event when a train is overhead, and when I do that, let's see, where is that? Here, I set a final velocity, and what that does is it uses a bit of logic to determine whether or not you need to speed up or slow down. And if you need to slow down, then it'll apply the brakes, set the throttle to 0, and if you need to speed up, it'll apply throttle and set the brakes to 0. But it's not that simple, because the throttle needs to be set in such a way that it produces an average total force output over the total distance in order to achieve the final velocity. And the way that I found out to do that is by essentially taking the integral of the total force needed estimated, right? So you subtract the standard like friction force of the rolling stock, um, and then you find the integral of the force needed to achieve a final distance um, at a certain velocity, and then you try and set the throttle such that the static friction force of the wheels to the rails plus the applied friction force caused by the traction motors in the locomotive, those two integrals added together result in a throttle that's similar. Now, because actually computing one single value proved to be extremely difficult, what I do is I do a descent procedure where I initialize the throttle to 0 and slowly increment it with ever increasing accuracy up until a certain point. So then I usually go through about 20 or 25 iterations before I find a throttle that's within like within my reasonable accuracy. Now, depending on the computer, you could have a much faster CPU, and also in a later version of open computers, Lua is sped up by 73% because of a whole bunch of updates. In that case, then you might want to go for more precision. However, on slower computers, you might want to turn it back. So yeah, that's about it.